Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cumberland County District Attorney Candidate Forum. Welcome to Jackie Sartoris, the Kennebec County Assistant District Attorney, and Jonathan Sarbeck, the Cumberland County District Attorney. We are so delighted that you're joining us for this forum. It is co-hosted by the Portland Center for Restorative Justice and the University of Southern Maine Department of Criminology. I'm Rachel Casey. I'm an assistant professor of social work at USM, and I'm also president of the Portland Center for Restorative Justice Board.
Thanks so much for coming tonight. My name is Jim Sparks. I'm a psychologist in Portland, and I'm vice president of the board of the Portland Center for Restorative Justice. Thought I'd try to give you a bit of our structure tonight. We have until 8:30, and Rachel and I will be asking questions until 8 o'clock. And at that point, we're going to turn it over to the audience. So if you are in the audience and would like to ask our candidates some questions, please go to the bottom of your screen. You'll see a Q&A button at the bottom, and you can write in your question there. We'll get to as many audience questions as we can, given our time constraints.
I also wanted to jump in, I'm sorry, Jim, and just mention that if you would like transcription services, you can do that by also clicking on the live transcript or CC button in the bottom of your screen as well.
And Rachel and I are about to dive into our questions, but we wanted to give the two of you a chance to introduce yourselves. And we'd like in about 2 minutes each, if you could tell us something about who you are as a person and as a prosecutor and why you want this job. And let's start with Jonathan.
Great. Well, thank you to, I just had a glitch there. Is it working?
You're
okay,
good.
Great. Thank you to Portland Center for Restorative Justice for having Jackie and I and hosting this forum, as well as USM. I really appreciate it and appreciate your interest in this important race. My name is Jonathan Sarbeck. I am the district attorney here in Cumberland County. I grew up in Cumberland County. I was born and raised here. I went to law school down at American University in DC, and had the pleasure and the luck to move back to Maine in 2012, where I worked as an assistant attorney general and then as an assistant district attorney in Cumberland County doing the human trafficking cases, and then was fortunate enough to be elected in 2018 to start serving as district attorney in 2019. In 2018, I ran as an independent. And when I took over the job in 2019, the main reason that I had run is because of what we were all seeing in Maine, which was the opioid epidemic. But then as I became district attorney and I started learning more about the issues that are surrounding our community, especially those ones that come into the criminal justice system, I realized that we as a system, especially in Cumberland County, need reform, and we need to take certain steps to really kind of get to that point where we can actually make changes in people's lives in a positive way by using the tools that we have in the criminal justice system, even though it's an imperfect system to really address the root causes of substance use disorder and mental health issues. So I started doing some programs. I'm not going to get too much into that now because I think that that's what this forum's for, to talk about. But it was an important factor for me when we started running. And about this time last year, I was approached by some Democrats, including some Democratic DAs, who talked to me about enrolling from an independent into the Democratic Party based upon the record that I had. And when I started examining that and talking to my family and friends about it and other Democrats, I decided that that was going to be my approach for this 2022 election. And I enrolled in September. And the reason I did so is because if you reflect, and I've reflected on my record, it really has those democratic values that the Democrats share when it comes to getting to the root causes and addressing to help people's lives with the tools that we have. And I think I'm very proud of my record, and I'm looking forward to talking about it tonight. And at the same time, though, I'm proud of my record, but there's still more work to do. And that's why I'm seeking re-election.
Thank you. And Jackie?
Thank you. I want to thank the Portland Center for Restorative Justice and USM's Criminology Department for hosting this event. It is an honor to be here with Jonathan. My name is Jackie Sartoris. I'm a 30-year Brunswick resident with 3 kids. I'm married to a wildlife biologist. I've served as a town councilor, a former vice chair of our Democratic Town Committee, and was a senior state planner for environmental law and policy under Governor Angus King. I've worked on climate change policy, and I am a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and the Maine School of Law. I became an assistant district attorney in Augusta 4 years ago. I'm the specialty court prosecutor for the state's only co-occurring disorders court, as well as the state's first veterans treatment court. After about a year of getting oriented as a prosecutor, I recognized a lack of some critical thinking in our existing system. I noticed the prevalence of poverty in both defendants and victims, the way that criminal charges, fines, and convictions cause ripple effects that are sometimes permanent, the absence of treatment for addiction, and the impacts on the families of those struggling with substance use disorder. I was particularly surprised that no one seemed to know the incarceration rate in Maine or thought it was a problem. People are mostly unaware that prosecutors have an incredible amount of power in this system. We, in fact, have the greatest power in this system. People are also, though, really eager for change. That was clear in 2018 when Cumberland County voted overwhelmingly to elect a Democrat who dropped out at the last minute. Jonathan, who was a long-term Republican before 2018, received 27% of the vote. Because the work we do is almost entirely confidential, the values of the prosecutors in the room making charging and plea decisions are most of what matters in making meaningful change. To change our system, which I believe is over-reliant on incarceration and punishment and fines, when help and recovery are far better for all of us, we need to elect district attorneys with trusted values who will champion pragmatic and public policies for change and be accountable. That is why I'm running to be the Democratic nominee. Thank you.
Thanks. Rachel?
Great, thank you both. We'll now move into our prepared questions, and we would like both of you to answer each question that we ask. You'll have an initial 2 minutes to respond, one of you and then the other. And then if there's anything you would like to add or amplify, you'll have an additional 1 minute each after that. So for our first question, it's a big one. What do you see as the most pressing issues within the criminal justice system in Maine? And what will your role as district attorney be in addressing those? And we'll start with Jonathan, please.
Thank you. I mean, that is a big question, and I'll try my best to keep it under 2 minutes. But to me, as one of the big things that we see, and it's kind of twofold, but is substance use disorder and mental health issues. And we can talk about the causes of that, which I think a lot of people know that sustained trauma at a younger age can really lead down that road towards substance use disorder and people developing mental health issues. So talking about those issues and how to address them using, like I said, an imperfect system that's been sort of the safety net is one of the important things that we try to do as prosecutors, and try to come up with ways to use the criminal justice system in a manner that's actually going to help somebody get into recovery and get that treatment into recovery, with the hope that we'll come up with a solution that's going to actually prevent somebody from coming back into the criminal justice system, reduce that recidivism in a manner that's going to address those root causes that cause people to come into the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, though, it's very difficult to do that alone. I mean, we've all heard the old adage, you can't arrest the way out of the problem. We can't prosecute our way out of the problem either. And so I think it's important for the district attorney to take an important role in our community to really getting out to talking to people about those root causes. Like I said, sustained trauma when you're a child, also known as adverse childhood experiences, but also working on issues like housing, employment, options for treatment, availability of medically assisted detox beds, that type of thing, that's really going to address those root causes in a manner that's going to be helpful for more people. Because at the end of the day, if we can get people into treatment and hopefully into recovery, then odds are that we're not going to see them come back into the criminal justice system. So that's a very important, I think the most important issue that we have going forward. And that's what I'm going to continue on working. We've made strides, I believe, but I think that we still have further to go.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. That was exactly 2 minutes. Well done. I'll turn it over to Jackie now.
Not sure I'll have the same timer effect.
It's okay.
So we've had a couple of these forums. Jonathan and I have some fundamental differences of opinion about what this job is. I don't see that being out in the community talking to people about crime prevention is really the primary role of the district attorney. I was joking the other day that it's like McGruff, the crime dog. And then I realized that, of course, nobody under 40 is going to know who McGruff, the crime dog, is. I really believe that the district attorney's job is to set prosecution policy. As I said at the start, we have by far the most power in this system. We decide when a referral comes in from police officers, from law enforcement, we decide who to charge, what level the charge should be, how to resolve the charge, what plea offers to make, and whether or not we're going to accept counteroffers from defense attorneys. That is a huge amount of power to have over people's lives. I see the primary role of the district attorney to be setting policy. And there was a whole host of questions that came out in 2018 from the MCLU that really strongly indicated that there was this urge for clear public policy. Other DAs around the country have taken that job on, and I think are doing an excellent job of setting policy, which is clear, which is compassionate, but which also champions a lot of the issues that Jonathan talks about, but through the place where we get to act, which is in problem solving with defendants and their families and with victims. So I see this as a very different job. I don't see that the public facing role is really the primary issue right now. I would like to tweak what we currently focus on away from crimes of poverty and toward crimes where we have underserved victims. I'm sure we'll get to talk more about that. I'm probably at my 2 minutes.
You're just about there, but thank you so much, Jackie. I'll turn it back to you, Jonathan, for 1 more minute if you have anything you'd like to add.
Sure, I'm actually 42, so I know who McGruff the crime dog is, Jackie. So that reference wasn't lost on me. But when it comes to this is a fundamental difference that we have between us. And Jackie really does see this as a policy position, when I see it really as a people position. The policy that we have in Cumberland County is really you have to take on every case on a case-by-case basis, because like every human being, every case is different. There's different needs, there's different histories, there's different facts that go along with the case. And when sometimes you come up with policies when it comes to actually how to charge and how to get to a case, or what you're going to recommend for a disposition of the case, that can become very binary. It's A or B. And I think in this system, the prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges would agree with me that it's just not that simple. Sometimes I wish it was that simple, that you could just say A or B and that's it. But when it comes to actually seeing a human being, which is the state versus so-and-so, that so-and-so is a human being with needs, with a history, something that we really have to take into consideration if we're going to get the best outcomes, not just best outcomes for defendants, but also for the community, for public safety. And I think that that's a key area. When it comes to prevention,
Jonathan, I'm gonna interrupt you. Yep, sorry about that, but I will turn it back to Jackie for 1 more minute.
Thank you. So obviously every case is case by case. All of us prosecutors know that. They're all decided based on the facts of the case, based on who that history tells us about that person. However, to take Jonathan's line is to say that we can't change the level of incarceration we currently have, that we can't change from an overwhelming focus on crimes, many of which are about poverty, to crimes which are about underserved populations, specifically people of color, women, hate crimes. Those crimes tend to go undercharged and underreported. I am quite sure that we can be case by case and also set smarter policy.
Thanks, Jackie. Turn it over to Jim for our next question.
You've touched on this already in terms of your philosophy. So here's the question. The criminal justice system may result in punishment for a crime, but the punishment given to an offender may not be particularly meaningful for those harmed by the crime. Restorative justice is one framework that promotes accountability by offenders, but also attends to the unique needs of those who've experienced harm, even offering, when it's appropriate, the chance for victims of crime to meet directly with the person who harmed them to describe the impact of the offense on their lives. What is your view of restorative justice, and are there ways you would like to expand its use in Cumberland County? And Jackie, I'm turning to you first for this question.
Thank you very much. I have an overwhelmingly positive assessment of restorative justice and did some mediation and mediation training as an attorney early on. So I understand the concepts, but also I've chosen to adopt the use of restorative justice in our co-occurring disorders and veterans treatment courts when that's appropriate. And I want to emphasize that that's for felony level crimes. I think usually we look at restorative justice as kind of an add-on for misdemeanor crimes, which otherwise may not result in substantive time of incarceration or substantive fines. I think that on the one hand, restorative justice is always a great thing, right? Having people just sit in effectively a little bit of a counseling session can be the first time that someone's really listened to them and encouraged to listen to other people for the first time in their lives. It is a really remarkable process of transformation. For people who don't know what restorative justice is, though, restorative justice is when you have an offender and a victim or a representative of victims who can come maybe together, but initially they meet with the individual person doing the restorative justice work. I understand that usually it's about an hour for many of these misdemeanor cases. What we've done, however, in Kennebec County is adopt restorative justice as a practice when we have victims, even in felony level cases. That's because when we ask the victims, would you like to participate in a restorative justice session? Or a year from now, when your defendant has gone all the way through treatment for mental health and substance use, that's what a co-occurring disorders court does, the only one in the state that has that combination in particular. What we say is, okay, the victim can opt to have that contact to be able to feel whole and heard, to be able to express how that criminal conduct affected their lives and continues to affect them. I think it's remarkably important work, and I support not just its use the way it's currently being used, but I really support expanding that to felonies. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, we just have to watch time because there's a lot we're trying to get to. Jonathan, could you respond?
Yeah, definitely. I completely support restorative justice. It's something that I brought to the Cumberland County DA's office in a manner that's actually a diversionary program that's the first in the state when it comes to restorative justice. Now, it surprises me that Jackie mentions restorative justice in the use of her treatment court, because I actually looked into restorative justice for our treatment court and was told that it wasn't best practices due to somebody's high risk, high needs, that people who are in the treatment court have those needs. And there's nothing in the policy and procedures manual that talks about restorative justice being used in the treatment court. If it is best practices, that's news to me, and I totally would recommend having it as part of our treatment court. At the same time, though, when it comes to restorative justice in 2018, we talked about this a lot, and I wasn't too aware of it. I'd heard of it sort of used as a mediation, sort of outside the courthouse. But then after being elected, but before becoming district attorney, I met with the Restorative Justice Institute of Maine to talk about it, seeing what ways we could use this in the criminal justice system. And so in 2019, I asked the county commissioners for a budget line, so I didn't have to go out and ask for grants, and could really take this program on and provide it to everybody free of cost for defendants, so people weren't priced out of it. And we developed this in 2020 with the Portland Center for Restorative Justice and the Restorative Justice Institute of Maine, sort of doing parallel programs, one for young adults and one for the others. We do misdemeanors, but we also do felony cases. I will say my assistant district attorneys have really bought in and understand the impact and the positive view that the victims who participate in restorative justice can have after this process is over. And that's one of the things that I think is one of the best positive things that you can do, and what the outcomes have been with restorative justice, is that victim being understanding, but also defendants too, really understanding that the harm that they cause by their actions could have a lasting impact, and seeing whether that person comes back in. I can tell you, over 400 cases that we've done with restorative justice, only a handful have come back into the criminal justice system, which I think really demonstrates the effectiveness. One quick thing though,
thank you, Jonathan. I'm just watching time. I know we could go on for an hour, but Jackie, do you have anything you want to add if you have a minute?
Just really quickly,
Yeah.
Jonathan raised the question of whether or not it was a best practice for us to be using restorative justice. I'm going to go back to what he said earlier about case by case, right? So each case is different. when we use restorative justice in the co-occurring disorders or veterans treatment court program, it's case by case. It's based upon the recommendation of treatment. Obviously, it's then brought to the judge for a recommendation about its use. And of course, the victims always have the final say in whether or not they want to participate. But it's, quite responsive to the sort of harms that we often see. Unfortunately, we just lost one of our participants with whom I really thought we were going to have a restorative justice practice between him and some of the folks that he had harmed. And unfortunately, we're not going to get to do that. But it was another way that I thought made sense and would have been really responsive to that case. Thank you.
Jonathan, you also have a minute if you.
Sure. One of the things I was going to say before I ran out of time was I've seen restorative justice work in the community as well. South Portland High School, I'm part of a community group called SOPO Unite, has actually adopted restorative justice policies within their school system that really kind of takes a look at getting away from the old type of discipline that a lot of schools unfortunately still use, but it really in a way that impacts the students in a way, not just when it comes to conflicts between students, but also with policies that they have when it comes to substance use disorders, things along those lines. And South Portland has really led the way when it comes to what impact that can have. And it really reduces the school to prison pipeline that I'm sure a lot of people are aware of, where oftentimes the lower level discipline that happens in school actually leads to being involved with the criminal justice system as a juvenile. And I think that what South Portland's doing is leading the way. So I'd urge people to go and learn more about what their program is and bring it into your own community.
Thank you. Rachel. I think you're muted, Rachel.
I sure am. Thank you. All right. Our next question. Differential access to financial resources can create an unequal justice system when it comes to issues like the ability to make bail or the need to plea bargain rather than defend a case in court. How would you address these and other economic issues to ensure a more equitable application of justice for people of all economic backgrounds? And we'll start with Jonathan for this one.
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that when we bail reform has been a big thing that we've talked about and looked at in Cumberland County and really by statute, but even before the statute was passed, taking into consideration somebody's economic situation when it comes to the terms of bail is an important factor. And oftentimes bail really can only be used in the manner of whether or not this person's going to show up to court and whether or not they're a danger to the community. And so what we tried to do is look at how we can get somebody to not be held pre-trial, if there are conditions that we could use, if there's a main pre-trial contract, if there's a situation where we don't have to rely on pre-trial detention in order for somebody to get or until their trial. Now, sometimes with high-level felony cases, we don't really get that option, and we do ask for high cash bail, and unfortunately, we don't get to address that. And as people would note that there's been a lot of people that have been held on bail waiting for trial, which the state's ready to take somebody to hold somebody accountable when it comes to trial. But unfortunately, a wealth-based system is a completely imperfect system. And systems like Washington, D.C., which has not had a cash bail system for a number of years, is something that we should really look at if we really want to make those impacts, because cash bail does not really address dangerousness. You could have a person who commits domestic violence assault numerous times, and the prosecutor might ask for $50,000 cash bail, and the judge orders it, and they might pat themselves on the back saying, I'm protecting the community. Meanwhile, that person posts a $50,000 cash bail and they're back into the community. So I think it's something that we really have to look at from a high level. But as far as in Cumberland County, we take those into account. I try to handle, as my schedule allows me, the in custodies on Mondays. And that's a conversation I've had with many lawyers of the day when they say, hey, the recommendation is $500 cash bail, but the person can make $200 cash bail. Do you agree? I say yes, because that $200 is that important to that person that I think that that's going to assure the safety of the community and get that person back in court.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan. I'll turn it over to Jackie now.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to start out with our first, I agree comment of the night. So I think I completely agree with Jonathan's comments about cash bail and about the need to really move away from a system which does not talk about dangerousness, frankly, in a way that I think is responsive to what we see. Because we see a lot, which frankly is not It's not about just saying, okay, we trust that this is all going to be fine. What we see is when it's not fine, and that needs to be better reflected in bail. The place that I want to go, though, is a little bit of a higher level, which is to how the system currently criminalizes poverty. And this is where I think the work needs to be in setting policy. Right now, there's a lot of emphasis on crimes, which are fairly easy to investigate, easy to charge, and easy to convict. Those are driving charges very often. Maine is a state where it's almost impossible to be without a car in most of the state. Now, some parts of Portland, a couple of places, my older kids have certainly learned the public transit system, but it is not, unfortunately, conducive for most people to get to jobs, to school, to daycare. And what we see is that there's a lot of charging of these driving crimes. The driving crimes are very often about poverty. It costs money to register, to insure, to pay to renew your license. And yet these folks can fall right into criminal conduct, according to the law enforcement officer who stops them, which when it's charged and convicted results in a fine and additional criminal penalties. We need to change our focus, help those people be legal, and place more of an emphasis on the crimes that are being undercharged and under-convicted.
Great. Thank you. Jonathan, back to you for 1 minute.
Yeah, that's a good point that Jackie just made with when it comes to sort of shrinking that idea of criminal behavior. And that's why I was in Augusta yesterday with DA Maloney trying to get in touch or trying to talk to senators about LD 1604, which was the decriminalization of numerous offenses, including some driving offenses, because we were trying to move those from Class E offenses down to civil offenses. But I think that's really sort of the tip of the iceberg. And I worked with the ACLU when it came to the bail reform bill that was passed last year. But I think on a practical level, we really need to continue in the practice that we've been doing in Cumberland County is having periodic reviews of who's being held, looking at those cash bail amounts, making those decisions on whether or not to modify somebody's bail based upon a small amount of cash bail that's there. And I think if you look at the numbers, which in 2018, there were approximately 300 people being held pre-trial, we're down to about 175. Now, COVID had a lot to do with that at the beginning, but we've maintained those numbers since COVID began. And I think that it's the reason because of people with either multiple cases or high-level felonies are the ones who are at Cumberland County Jail held on bail. Great.
Thanks, Jonathan. Okay, and then Jackie, 1 more minute if you have anything to add.
I would just add again that the criminalizing poverty issue is very real. It is also in Maine. The one thing I didn't mention were the petty theft cases. So if you have 2 shoplifting convictions, minor shoplifting convictions, the third minor shoplifting charge can be charged at a felony level. That is about poverty. And that lack of a sort of systemic policy approach, that's what I'm talking about. So it impacts at the individual level, and yes, it's case by case, but we need to move away from the reflexive charging of felonies because we can.
Thanks, Jackie. Jim, over to you.
Great. I'm up now. I have a similar systemic question. Multiple studies have shown that people of color experience significant inequities in encounters with the criminal justice system, ranging from more frequent traffic stops and arrests to different treatment and charging decisions, and ultimately in rates of incarceration. What can you do as a district attorney to address the ways that bias, both conscious and unconscious, impacts people of color? And Jackie, if you could go first.
Thank you. For starters, we actually need to track the data. In 2018, the MCLU asked a clear series of questions of all of the candidates about their commitment to understanding racial bias and to tracking data. Jonathan responded in his questionnaire that he didn't really see this as an issue. I know that, subsequently, I think he's learned some things, but the issue for me is that we've known this is an issue for a very long time. We see that in the incarceration rates in Maine, where people who are Black and brown are incarcerated at 3 and 4 times the rate of presence in the population. There is an obvious indicator of potential bias. In order to get at the roots of that bias, we really did need to start collecting that data 4 years ago. We've lost those 4 years. And this isn't a question of we need a better database. I've heard this in a number of forums, right? Yes, there's a better database on the horizon. It's been on the horizon for several years. It is possible, and it was possible 4 years ago, to collect, track that data, and then try to chase down where are most of these cases coming from? What kinds of cases are they? Are we concerned about racial bias enough to track the cases and have a public conversation about it? I will commit right now to making that a top priority, because we know that there are disproportionate numbers of people who are being charged, convicted, and incarcerated compared to presence in the population. It's a clear indicator of a need for serious work with a very public accountability.
Great. Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm going to match Jackie's I agree moment that she just had with me, because I agree with her that data is important. And yes, I have evolved in this where I was in 2018, really not having an understanding of the importance of data, but I do now. And it's not just something I decided I have an importance of it right now in 2022. In 2019, I believed it too. And we agreed when I say we, I mean all the district attorneys for all of our data sets in the state of Maine, including DA Maloney in Kennebec County. We wanted our data analyzed, and we gave it to the Council for State Governments for them to have it as part of their Justice Reinvestment in Maine report that came out in December of 2019. Unfortunately, when it came out, it had some great information, definitely showing the disparities that we know exist with BIPOC individuals and their connection to incarceration and the criminal justice system. But what it didn't include is the district attorney's data. And so because of that, I took steps to first reach out to USM to talk about, and this was right when the pandemic was happening. And so the county was putting a hold on being able to spend money on that. And so I then talked to an individual named Jim Highland that I work with at the United Way of Southern Maine and the Thrive 2027 cabinet, who offered to do it for free. But first he had to look at it. Well, after months and months of looking at it, he discovered that there's too many gaps within our case management system to do an analysis. Now, I then came back to USM and George Shaler, who I'm working with, and they are putting together a report that's going to be out later this year. The reason that's happening is because of my leadership when it comes to getting that data analyzed. Data is great, but you need that analysis to really understand where we need to do better for everybody in our community. And then one more thing I just want to say on this, training is very important as well. I had in 2019, I spearheaded an implicit bias training in which I had a district attorney, actually a Maine graduate from Bravos County, Texas, named Jarvis Parsons, come up and not just speak to my prosecutors, but I opened it up to the rest of the state. We then continued it in 2020 with a 6-part training with MindBridge.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm just watching time here. You have a little bit more time. Jackie,
okay.
just wondering if you had any to add for a minute or amplify.
Yeah, I'll be really quick. I completely agree that racial bias training was a good idea. That was something that Jonathan did not support in 2018. That is in his questionnaire. His dismissal of the racial bias issue is out there in the public realm from his 2018 questionnaire. It was kind of interesting to read that someone would so readily dismiss this issue. I believe that Jonathan has learned some things since becoming DA, which I think was not something he could have anticipated. I believe it's a job that he wants to hold on to. However, I think that there is a problem with the perspective here, where if you're waking up to the fact that this is an issue just in the last couple of years, you're a bit behind. And I think it's really important for us to have champions who will lead on these issues, not because they're just starting to notice them, but because they're committed to the work of justice. So I think it's a substantial difference between the two of us, and I'm eager for change.
Jonathan, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I served on the Racial Equity Steering Committee in the city of Portland. I was honored to have that post appointed by Mayor Snyder, and there were numerous people on that committee that support me to be reelected as district attorney. And I'd ask you to reach out to them to talk to them about what their experiences was, because I think you're going to hear that I was a valued community partner within that. But one of the things it taught me is really hearing from people with that lived experience that have had that impact on, or seen that racism in Portland, Maine. When you hear from a friend of yours that the first time he was ever called the N-word happened in Portland, Maine, when he was leaving the hospital with his daughter, and then find out that happened 9 years ago, that's unacceptable in my view. And it's really something that we really as a community need to talk about, need to address. And for prosecutors who can do harm, because we have that substantial amount of power, like Jackie was talking about, we really have to have an understanding about this. So we need to, so we can do better as prosecutors, so everybody gets that taste of justice that they deserve.
Thank you. Rachel, back to you.
Great. Our next question is about immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers, which account for over 6% of the population in Cumberland County, which is almost 18,000 people. What responsibility does the district attorney have for mitigating unintended consequences of prosecution of immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, such as potential deportation? And Jonathan, we'll start with you for this question.
Yeah, that's a really important question, and we see it quite often actually in the district attorney's office. What I have told my prosecutors and the philosophy that I go with is that we act with regards to what our tasks are as prosecutors, but we act with compassion. And to me, compassion is thinking about the collateral consequences for different people, and that's again going back to that idea of cases need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. If you have a philosophy that says, okay, every OUI that comes in, you plead guilty to the OUI, and then you go through a deferred, and you get and it's pled down to a driving to endanger. Well, that impact of a driving to endanger can have a different impact on different people, especially if you have immigration, if you're an asylum seeker or you're a new Mainer, anything along those lines. And so we really need to take that into consideration, and we do take it into consideration because it's that important. Collateral consequences when it comes to driver's license, when it comes to jobs, when it comes to housing, those are all important. And so is immigration status as well.
Thanks, Jonathan. Over to you, Jackie.
So we have another agreement moment. We definitely have had cases that I've handled where immigration consequences are right there on the table. And so we differentiate on a case-by-case basis between crimes where there's a tremendous risk to the public. Specifically, I'm certainly aware of a domestic violence assault case where it absolutely needed to be charged at the level at which it occurred. There are other charges. I'm recalling a driving charge with a gentleman who didn't have a license, who was told to drive by his boss. And in those cases, resulting in deportation is a sort of a bridge too far. I do think, though, again, I'm going to go back to this values piece. This is a Democratic primary. We are selecting our Democratic nominee. And I am mindful of the fact that at a time when I and so many other people were writing letters to Senator Collins and Senator King and doing all the things that none of us really wants to do in the years leading up to, and then including the Trump election in 2016, Jonathan was a Republican. There's no record of ever objecting to any of the rhetoric coming from Republicans that whole time. And that frankly concerns me. I feel as if our lived values are, not just the values of which party we register for, but my goodness, if you're going to stay a member of the Republican Party during the years of Paul LePage, and then during the election of Donald Trump, and the whole time with the birther controversy that kept being raised, which was a racist trope trying to raise questions of Obama's legitimacy and immigration status, it causes me grave concerns about the values of the person that we're electing. So that's, my concern there. I don't think there's much of a difference, though, between what Jonathan said and what I would do.
Thanks, Jackie. Jonathan, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think a letter next to somebody's name defines who they are. I think what they do and their actions that they say define who they are. And I think that what I've done in the last 4 years as district attorney defines that I have those values, those democratic values that make me somebody who should be reelected when it comes to what we've been doing in Cumberland County and what I want to continue to do. I've been doing by word and by action. And I don't even want to say this, but I will. I don't support Donald Trump. I never supported Donald Trump. And I don't want to see Paul LePage get reelected. I want to see Governor Mills get reelected. And I think if that's that important to say, I'll say it. But I think when it comes down to these issues that we're talking about, these collateral consequences, it's very important to take these into consideration. I will say this, I worked quite a bit with Fatuma Hussein from the Immigrant Resource Center. She's put together diversion programs for me for individuals in her community that I think really address it much better than what I would do for other individuals, because that's what we need to do. We need to be looking at cases that are going to get those best outcomes for people, and by working with the community in order to get those best outcomes.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Jackie, anything you'd like to add?
I mean, Maine's a small state. We have many of the same contacts. I've worked with Fatuma as well. I've been endorsed by folks who are very much working within the community of folks who are concerned about immigration issues. And I think that, I'm proud of those endorsements and very willing and eager to make sure that we have dialogue and continue to make sure that we're responsive to what are really some very different cultural expectations and what can be, I know, a very confusing experience of the American criminal legal system. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Jim.
Okay. Slight shift here. For years, Maine has been wrestling with how to respond to youth accused of crimes. Much of this debate is focused on how to change our approach in order to reduce the significant negative impacts on the lives of young people who enter the system, while also ensuring the need for public safety. How would you describe your philosophy when it comes to addressing youth accused of crimes? And what would you do to promote juvenile justice reform? And Jackie, could you go first?
Yes, thank you. This has been an issue which I really am grateful to Maine Youth Justice for their advocacy work, because I think what we've learned is when it comes to power, we have to stand up for change if we want to make change. And so more advocacy is really the reason we are where we are right now. I support Representative Victoria Morales's proposal, which is unfortunately not what has been currently adopted. I hope that it will be up again in the next legislative session. I want to note that Victoria Morales is the representative who's the co-chair of the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. She's endorsed my campaign. She has recommended and requested that we have set up 2 centers for youth justice centers, 2 residential centers where there is a smaller sort of locked unit and then more of an educational unit, and that we close Long Creek. I don't think it's really controversial at this point, though, to say that Long Creek is an anachronism. It was built at a time when we just somehow thought we were going to fill up and fill up and fill up these kind of unpleasant incarceration settings. And I think it's really high time that we closed it. I'm a little disappointed in what the governor chose to recommend. I do not support her decision not to adopt that proposal. So my hope is that we close Long Creek. I will advocate strongly for that. I do think the way that we're looking at youth justice actually is sort of a microcosm in some ways of the way that we're looking at treating justice issues broadly, which is prevention, addressing mental health and substance use related issues, and really looking at trauma. I think that, these kids are our community. They are with us their whole lives, and we need to start to work with them in a way which is responsive to the need to incorporate them into the community in a really compassionate way. Having said that, every now and then there is someone who's quite dangerous, and we need to make sure that we maintain protection for the community.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah, I would just say diversion when it comes to youth involved in the criminal justice system, trying to get ways that are going to address their community needs for what they are, but also trying to ensure that we use informal adjustments, which is a way to not actually bring formal charges against somebody, but also have their have supports from the JCCOs. I supported and I actually testified in favor of Representative Morales's bill. That was actually one of the key parts of that bill, was actually taking jurisdiction away from the district attorney's offices and from criminal prosecution for kids under the age of 12. The state of Maine doesn't have a child in need of services type of system that some places do, like Massachusetts, that actually uses they use the Department of Children and Families. We would use DHHS to get involvement from the courts to really address those needs that those kids have. We use the criminal justice system. That's wrong. We shouldn't do that, because what happens is that we actually then have to rely on incarceration to ensure that kids actually do what they're basically doing. And if they don't, then boom, they could end up in the criminal justice system. That's not what we should be using, especially for kids under the age of 12. The trauma that can come from incarceration is huge. It's one of those adverse childhood experiences that I've talked about that can really lead to people down in the criminal justice system later. If you look at stats right now, 72% of people in incarceration and 70% in our treatment court have an ACEs score of 4 or higher. So we really need to understand the impact that can have, including the impact of the criminal justice system. So we need more services out there for kids. We need something that's going to provide them to keep them out of the criminal justice system. Don't let them come into court with the prosecutors or the police or law enforcement. We really need to be doing better by our kids when it comes to that. And when it comes to secure facilities, I completely support the repurposing of Long Creek. But at the same time, we do unfortunately sometimes need a secure facility for youth that may either commit violent offenses or sexual offenses that puts the public safety at risk.
Thank you. Jackie, did you want to respond for anything you want to add?
Just that I support the idea that we need to have a much more responsive system. I do want to put the cautionary note in there that I do not believe the DHHS, unfortunately, has shown to this date a real capacity to handle these sorts of complex issues. I really think we need either a standalone agency or that we need a different board that would oversee these sorts of decisions. And I know that that conversation has happened a little bit at the legislature. I would certainly advocate to make sure that we are responsive and aware of the limitations of the current DHHS system, which is really overburdened.
Thank you. Jonathan, anything else to add?
Yeah, no, I agree with Jackie with regards to the burden that DHHS has. And unfortunately, that's, I think, one of the reasons that the bill that Representative Morales proposed and was voted through didn't go because of that lack of capacity on DHHS. But at the same time, we shouldn't be the catch-all when it comes to the criminal justice system when kids fall through these systems. It happens in the adult court with mental health issues and substance use disorder. So we all need to be doing better as a community to get these services so people can, both juveniles and adults, can stay out of the criminal justice system.
Great, thank you. Rachel, back to you.
Great. Well, both of you have spoken about mental health courts and substance use courts earlier tonight. So we have another question about that. What considerations should the district attorney make for people accused of crimes who also have mental health or substance use difficulties? How do you balance accountability with compassion? We'll go to Jonathan first.
Yeah, I don't mean if I'm repeating myself on this one, but that's a really important question. I think 80% of cases that come into the criminal justice system have their roots in some type of mental health issue or substance use disorder. Because quite frankly, people don't rob, they don't steal unless they're doing it for a reason that really has their roots in substance use disorder. Substance use disorder is a brain disorder. It's basically a person has had their brain rewired, and sometimes the roots of that are in sustained trauma from growing up. But right now, with the dangers that we have with fentanyl and methamphetamines, we really try to use the criminal justice system in a way to try to get people into treatment. When a prosecutor gets a case, it's basically got a police report and a criminal history if somebody has one. That's about it. So we either have to rely on defense counsel to try to provide us with information or other information from other resources to really understand who that person is, what happened to that person, why is that person in the criminal justice system. So if we can address those needs, if we can really kind of come up with a manner that's going to get that person into treatment, like I said earlier, there's a better chance that that person's not going to come back into the criminal justice system. And so when we can use things like the drug treatment court that we have in Cumberland County, the veterans treatment court that we have in Cumberland County, the case that both of which I'm on the prosecutor who's on that team, the only district attorney in the state that's actually takes care of its own treatment court. But the reason I do is because it's that important, and coming up with sentences in a way that's actually going to not end up with that person who's having a guilty plea or a guilty conviction because of their substance use disorder is really important. Before I took over the treatment court in Cumberland County, it was a probation only court. It's not anymore. We do defer dispositions. We do cases that we continue for sentences, and the defense attorneys who participate with me would vouch to that. But we know that relapse is part of the recovery, and we understand that as a treatment court. And if we can get more treatment courts more available for more people, then I think we're going to have better outcomes. But that's the compassionate part, is really understanding who that person is in a way that's going to get them the best results by working with defense counsel to get that information.
Thanks, Jonathan. Jackie?
Thank you. This is a primary reason why I decided to run. As the prosecutor in Kennebec County on the state's only co-occurring disorders court, all of our folks have a co-occurring disorder, so mental health and substance use issues that are really informing their criminal conduct. And we start out by doing an assessment. Can we help this person? And if we help this person, will it result in greater safety for the public? And the vast majority of the time, the answer is yes. If they are co-occurring, we can help them. It will help the public. A big part of the reason that I decided to run is because those treatment courts are very limited in terms of the number of people that we are able to accept. Our court has expanded and expanded in Kennebec County. We've continued to expand even during the pandemic. We've had a terrific judge on that court. And the problem I have is that those same ideas are not normatively applied to non-treatment court cases. And yet the same issues inform so much of the criminal conduct. So what I would do differently is have a treatment first approach to people who are committing crimes informed by substance use disorder. Mental health, very similar. We do a lot of that right now in Kennebec County. Those are diversion programs where you sign up for mental health evaluation, substance use evaluation, you commit to treatment, and it's dropped down to either a misdemeanor or a dismissal. That needs to be a normative approach. It would result in a reduction in incarceration, and it would give people the treatment they actually need. Again, this is a policy level issue, and we can resolve this with clearer public policy, which is about being more just.
Thank you, Jackie. Back to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, and I apologize if I'm really talking fast. It's just the 2-minute timers in my head and I'm trying to get out as much as I can. So I apologize to the audience for that. But one of the things that I think has been very important and what we've done with in Cumberland County is that we've created coalitions. I created the Cumberland County Coalition on Substance Use Prevention, which is a group of stakeholders in the community that get together about every 6 weeks to really network and talk about what we've been doing. I work with the Maine Prisoner Reentry Network up in Augusta on their weekly calls. It's really that important for the DA to be visible, to talk to people in recovery. I can tell you, if you drive around Greater Portland, you're going to see a lot of lawn signs out. A lot of those lawn signs are actually on recovery residences. And that's because there's many in the recovery community that support me as the district attorney and want to see me get reelected because they know what we've been doing, that I will help people get into recovery and stay in recovery and try to reduce that stigma that's so important for people in treatment. So everybody in the community can have that chance, then that they can have that hope when they get to recovery.
Great, thank you. Jackie, anything to add?
Just that, again, this question of visibility, I think, is a primary difference between the two of us. I believe that you set public policy, you collect data to support that public policy, and then you're accountable for what that public policy achieves. I believe that we will reduce incarceration and help people through treatment, and that we need to establish that as a public policy and then advocate for the resources we need to make that happen more effectively. This is it's great to know people and be out in public and talk to people. I certainly have relationships with the community in Kennebec County where, people have been in our courts, are in recovery, and I would continue to have those sorts of relationships. However, setting clear public policy and being accountable, that's the primary job of the district attorney.
Great. Thank you both so much. It's time now to turn to questions from people in the audience. So if you're here with us watching, as a reminder, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit a question. For our first question, I'd actually like to speak to something that you were just talking about, Jackie. I was hoping that you both could share with our audience what you see as the role of district attorneys in setting policy. Like, how do district attorneys actually go about doing that? For those of us who may not actually be that familiar with what a district attorney really does. So maybe just speaking to the logistics around that a little bit more. So Jackie, if you wanted to follow up with what you were saying, and then we'll go back to Jonathan.
Sure. I've been really honored to participate with my DA, Megan Maloney, in Kennebec County in some of those policy setting conversations. And it's really, frankly, heartening to be part of those conversations because they are careful. We have a careful assessment of what the issues are. Usually there's a dialogue about what we're seeing with examples. How can we do this differently? It enabled us, Megan, years ago to set, DA Maloney, years ago to set our OUI policy in Kennebec County, which was a way to hold people accountable, give them the opportunity for treatment for their alcohol, their drinking issues, and then to be able to get a drop down from an OUI to a driving to endanger. That's been adopted pretty much, that's been the normal policy statewide. We've made some tweaks to it in-house. However, there are other policies that can be set within the DA's office. I'll give you a shining example. One of the things that I find really concerning, there is a national best practice when it comes to sexual assault cases, and that is to test the evidence which victims painstakingly provide. Evidence is collected from sexual assault victims, and the normative process, the national best practice, is to test every reported case's DNA. That is not what's happened here in Cumberland County. Frankly, it's been an issue statewide. Maine has had this issue like a lot of places, but it's been a known quantity for a long time that this is the best way to handle these sexual assault cases. So we have had a policy setting committee in the DA's office in Kennebec County. We are shifting our policy and we'll do it differently. And that is the way that we set these policies. It's really important to the public because it's about accountability.
Great. Jonathan, can you speak to how the district attorney sets policies, what that looks like?
Yeah, no, I think that there's a foundation that some district attorneys have when it comes to policies. And I've worked in Bristol County, Massachusetts. I've worked in Middlesex County, Massachusetts. I've worked for the Attorney General's office. And I've seen different offices and different policies that they have. And a lot of times what happens with policies is that you come up against a policy and you say, just like I was talking about earlier, that A and B are the only options, but A and B don't fit. You got to find a C or a D or an E. And what ends up happening is that you deviate from that policy because it's in the interest of justice. That's our guiding light as prosecutors, to act in the interest of justice. So policies, I can understand that they can have accountability when it comes to the for politics purposes, to say to groups that, well, this is my policy and this is the way I go. But a lot of times you have to deviate from those types of policies. And one of the guiding light that we take as an oath as prosecutors is for the purposes to act in the public, to protect public safety and abide by the Constitution of the United States and the state of Maine. So I can understand the policy aspect of it, but at the same time, case by case basis, looking at it at every case in a way that's actually going to get to what is best for public safety and what can reduce recidivism, address those needs that the defendant has, I think is the best policy to go about. And one thing with regards to what Jackie was saying about untested kits, there's a little bit more to it. Any type of situation where there's a sexual assault that occurs and a person reports what happened and is willing to be an active victim in a case, those get tested. That's part of what we do in Cumberland County. We make sure that those get tested. What the untested cases, kits that I think is the referral is for those anonymous ones. And that's not anonymous. I mean, the women who report to an ED talk to a sane nurse or a safe nurse, and they get the kit that happens. What happens with those kits is that those actually get taken to the police station, and they get kept indefinitely by the police station. So if that victim ever wants to come forward and tell police about their story, then we're going to have the evidence. The evidence is going to be kept. And so that's what those kits that aren't tested are actually survivors who have made that decision that they're not ready to come forward yet. And I think if we're all of a sudden going to start testing those for those survivors, we in a way might be outing them in a way that they're not ready. And that's not a trauma-informed response to have to survivors of sexual assault. So
Great.
we do. Okay. Sorry.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'll turn it back to Jackie for 1 minute.
So I'll go from the small to the big. I don't believe that Jonathan is correct. I don't believe there is any county in Maine that is testing all reported kits. So I think, with all due respect, I don't believe that's factually accurate. On this question of no policies and you can't do case by case, that is rubbish. Policy setting is not about avoiding a case by case analysis. We have absolutely the fundamental job of taking a case by case analysis. Policy setting, however, is about being accountable to the public and not saying, oh, I set this policy and we all follow the policy, without regard to the facts. Of course not. No one would ever say that. But without a policy that says it is my goal It is my vision for this office to reduce incarceration, to show that we are using treatment to resolve more cases, to measurably change the way that we resolve more of these petty theft cases. Without setting those policies and without then having them be measurable, there's no accountability to the public. It is one of the biggest complaints about what prosecutors do. We are a black box with almost zero accountability, and that is still true in Cumberland County.
Thanks, Jackie. Back to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, I just think that if people asked individuals who are involved in the criminal justice system, judges, defense attorneys, advocates, either sexual assault advocates or domestic violence advocates, law enforcement, about what's been happening, and prosecutors, about what's been happening in the last 4 years since I've become district attorney, I think I'm very confident that you're going to hear that this is an office that's well run, that stands up for victims, that speaks for them in court, that holds people accountable, but also acts with compassion in a way that really understands the underlying issues that brought somebody into the criminal justice system and tries to address those needs as best suitable in a way without compromising public safety. And I think that if we're looking at it from a 50,000 foot view, I think that from those reviews that you would get of how I've been as a leader in Cumberland County as a district attorney, I think you're going to get a lot of positive responses.
Thanks, Jonathan. All right. Jim, have you been following the Q&A, or should I keep going with those?
Yes. Do you want me to just pick one or
Yeah,
I'll,
if you'd like to.
I'll do that. So here's an audience question. Describe your experience taking under-prosecuted crimes like sexual assault and human trafficking to trial, and how you have built supports for survivors. And I would start with Jackie here.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. So I started working at the Kennebec County DA's office about 4 years ago, a little more than 4 years ago. Most of my cases have involved, when they have been domestic violence, sexual assault cases at all, they have been in reviewing them for the treatment courts. Those are specialty prosecution areas, and they are not areas that I've specialized in, unlike Jonathan. However, I have dealt with a number of cases through our specialty courts that raise a lot of issues with victims. And my job is to reach out at times to those victims to keep them in the loop. We've done that often through our victim witness advocates. All offices use victim witness advocates as a way to make sure that prosecutors don't inadvertently become witnesses. But what I really focus on is making sure that victims are involved in most of the steps in the treatment court process. When they want to be, they're involved. When they don't want to be, we let them know at the beginning and we let them know at the end that they have opportunities to speak about sentencing, to speak about whether or not they want someone to come into those courts to begin with. As someone who's been involved with folks who've been crime victims and also folks who have really struggled with substance use disorder, I am well aware of the importance of involving our victims at every step along the way. It's not just a statutory obligation. There is a statutory obligation. It's really a strong moral obligation, because at the end of the day, it means a small community. You're going to run into that person potentially, and you really want to make sure that the victim knows what's happened, is either in support or fully aware, and has had their opportunity to be heard.
Great. Jonathan?
Yeah, I've tried domestic violence cases, human trafficking cases, sexual assault cases, and I concur with Jackie about victim involvement and really helping them out along the way. It's one of the reasons that I think our victim witness advocates are such an essential part of our office. But since becoming district attorney, what I've done is, understanding the importance of those cases, I've expanded the domestic violence unit. We actually have a domestic violence prosecutor who's a specialist that gives training in strangulation to local law enforcement and other individuals, so that they have an understanding about the very serious nature of strangulation. 50% of the homicides that happen in the state of Maine had their roots in domestic violence. So I think working not just with law enforcement to educate them about how to investigate a strangulation case and really trying to prosecute that to the fullest to really try to save and help that victim, but also working with domestic violence advocates like in Cumberland County with Through These Doors and the Violence Intervention Partnership, a woman named Faye Lupi who works for Cumberland County, who's been doing this for a couple decades now when it comes to this. That's the key parts of this is working with our community and having those advocates help us out in the prosecution. Yes, what our role is different than what we do in the criminal justice system compared to what advocates do, but working with them, working with the sexual assault response team, getting that message out to them to know that when a victim is ready to come forward and talk to us, we're going to listen to them. We're going to understand them. We're going to communicate with them, even if it is a situation where we have to address the case in a way that we think is in the interest of justice. So I think that those key messages to the community when it comes to working with advocates, both human trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault is key. When I was a human trafficking prosecutor, I made a lot of great, strong relationships with survivor-led organizations, which I still hold today, including Survivor Speaks USA, Stop Trafficking Us, Just Love Worldwide, Courage Lives, a whole number of them.
Just watching time here. Jackie, anything you would like to add?
Yep, this is another area where there is a policy issue, I think, that's really important. So for domestic violence cases in particular, there is a national best practice of using expert witnesses. That has not been a best practice that's been adopted, as I understand it, in Cumberland County. And I think that needs to change. Typically, the DA doesn't do a lot of trial work, but the DA sets policy. And this is an area where, especially for domestic violence and sexual assault, most of the victims of these crimes are women. Women overwhelmingly are avoiding the criminal justice system for these crimes. That's been the case right along, and those reported cases have dropped off increasingly. And that is why it is so important for us to have folks who represent people who are not typically represented in law enforcement circles. Over 85% of law enforcement officers are men. And frankly, the policies that have happened over time, normative practices and policies, are not reflective of the role and experience of women. It is something that is central to justice for us.
Jonathan, you have.
Well, I can tell you in Cumberland County, the Portland Police Detective is named Jess Googans. She's the detective that handles all domestic violence cases in South Portland. It's Officer Aaron Curry investigates their domestic violence cases. I'm not sure where Jackie's getting her information with regards to not using experts in Cumberland County, because we certainly do. I've signed off on the expenditures when it comes to bringing in expert witnesses, at least on a handful of cases that I can remember in my head right now. I'd have to talk to Katie Dakers and Angie Cannon and Kevin Moynihan about it. But those were cases involving strangulation and which actually have been elevated to attempted murder charges. And I can't get into the facts of those because they're pending. At the same time, though, there's no practice in Cumberland County that says we are not going to use expert witnesses. We use them all the time. Paulie Campbell, who's a strangulation expert, is on speed dial for a lot of the domestic violence prosecutors. We bring them in because we know that delayed reporting is important. Strangulation isn't just something that's easy. Usually strangulation, you can't, in only 50% of the cases can you see injuries. In only 15% of those cases can you actually have pictures of those injuries. So it's those small things, petechia, details, strangulation, raspy voice, along those lines.
Just got to wrap up in terms of time. On to you, Rachel.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of paraphrase a couple different questions that we've gotten about law enforcement. And I was hoping that you could both speak about what the relationship is between the district attorney and law enforcement, and especially how the district attorney can hold law enforcement accountable for potential racism, police brutality, things like that. So we'll start with, I think, with Jonathan. It's your turn to start this time.
Yeah, that's a really important question. I think that a lot of people have heard the old adage that nobody hates a bad cop worse than other cops, because what that impact can have. But the district attorney's office plays a key role in that. I mean, if we see cases that come up that we think that there's an issue with regards to premeditation for a stop based upon race or based on those things, we need to step up as prosecutors and say, we're not going forward with that charges. And then we have to notify the police about that. That's an important role that we play in the criminal justice system, because we're not about simply getting guilties or getting convictions or charging people. We are acting in the interest of justice, and we have to hold law enforcement accountable when it comes to pretextual stops that we might see, or someone stepping over the line. That's a role that we have to play as prosecutors, and I do that. One of the big issues that we have is Giglio policy, and people are not familiar with Giglio, but Giglio, US versus Giglio was a case that happened back in the 70s, and basically it means that a prosecutor has an ongoing obligation to turn over discovery in the form of untruthfulness or veracity claims that go to every witness, not just to victims of crime or witnesses, and that includes law enforcement. So I adopted a policy back in 2020 that I'd send out these and inquire with all the law enforcement agencies in Cumberland County to make sure that they are giving us that information, and that information is provided to defense counsel when it is would be appropriate for discovery, because there are rules. There's employment law within the state of Maine that doesn't automatically make employment information available to the public. However, the Constitution, due process, trumps employment law. So if we do have an issue when it comes to Giglio that a defendant needs to see, that is provided to defense counsel. And I do continue every year to gentle reminder to law enforcement, even though it's an ongoing obligation that they have to give it to us. So I could remind them one day, they say we don't have any, something happens the next day, they have to tell us.
Great, thank you. Jackie?
Thank you. It's a great question. I have had really great relationships with the law enforcement officers I've been privileged to work with. These are great guys. You'd be proud to have them as your sons, as your brothers, but they're overwhelmingly male. And I think, it's important to note that nationally, police officers are overwhelmingly conservative politically. What does that mean? Well, that doesn't mean they're bad guys or they're doing bad work. It means that they do not have the full perspective of the community that they serve. And I think it's important to bring that outsider perspective to the work of law enforcement. And that's something that I absolutely do now as a prosecutor and would clearly do as a district attorney. Why do I say that this matters? Well, if your perspective has been a conservative white male your whole life, you have no idea how scary it is to get that the sirens going and the light in the windshield, in the rear view mirror, and to be pulled over. Frankly, it's a totally different experience, and it's a totally different experience to encounter law enforcement as a woman or as someone who is non-binary. I mean, we have experiences in the world which are not currently well represented in law enforcement. And I think it's very important, if you're going to lead change in Cumberland County, that you understand the experience of the rest of us and are able to incorporate that into the policies of the office.
Great. Jonathan?
Yeah, and I just think Jackie brings up some good points. Speaking about law enforcement and having those communications, creating those bonds, those community coalitions where people can talk, so police can hear from individuals, BIPOC individuals, women, members of the LGBTQ community about their experiences with law enforcement does change law enforcement. They start listening more. They start taking that into consideration. So I think that that's actually a great message to get that out there, to increase this accountability by more communication between them, because I would doubt that any member of law enforcement in Cumberland County would be adverse to talking to people in the community. In fact, a lot of them want to get out in the community, talk to them, find out more about them, because I think if the more we communicate, the more we can work better together.
Thank you. Jackie?
Just again, I think we've all had the experience of talking a lot these last bunch of years, and yet here we are, poised to have a world where my basic bodily autonomy and that of my daughter is not really protected at all. I think what we've learned is if you're not at the table, you are on the menu. We need to have people not just talking, not just listening, but in positions of power. If we hadn't known that a week ago, I think we learned it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So again, want to paraphrase a couple different questions that are coming in. Can you both speak to your stance on the use of harm reduction in responding to substance use in the community, as well as your stance on decriminalization of drug use? And we will start with Jackie for this one.
Thank you. I've had a lot of questions about decriminalization over the last few weeks. I think in part because we've seen some tremendous losses in the recovery community. One of those folks recently was in our court. It's always really hard, frankly, to lose members of any community, and the recovery community is a community that I've become close to in Kennebec County. I'm sure Jonathan has as well in Cumberland. So harm reduction, I apologize, harm reduction and the question of decriminalization. Decriminalization, not only have I been close to members of the recovery community, I've had close friends whose children have actually struggled with heroin addiction over the course of a really long time. And that's been, very hard to watch up close as the friend of a mom, right? And also friends who've lost children. So I think that decriminalization sounds great to a libertarian. I'm not a libertarian. I'm also a mom. And I can tell you that the reason that we had a period of prohibition in this country is because women realized that access to alcohol was creating incredible amounts of harm in the community. Now, we didn't stick with prohibition because all of the bad stuff that happened after prohibition was also causing harm. The mob, for example, and a lot of illegal conduct. I think if we decriminalize drugs, we're going to end up with more kids that are experimenting with drugs. And those drugs were created to addict people. We know that now after seeing all of those transcripts and information from these various trials involving the Sackler family and other people who've just been in this for the money. They were created knowing that they caused addiction. And the idea that we're just going to say, well, maybe the right thing to do is decriminalize. I don't think so. Harm reduction, I'm a huge supporter of. And I do think that we need to have safe places where people who are already struggling are not going to have consequences simply by trying to get what they really medically need. So I want to prevent additional addiction, but I also think we need to adopt harm reduction measures and do that in a very compassionate way. The reality is people need access to those substances once they are addicted until they're on some kind of medication-assisted treatment.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah, harm reduction is something that I understand and I support. And my first visit to the needle exchange in 2018 after getting elected DA was something that I really sort of, Lizzie and Zoe down there gave me a very better understanding of what harm reduction is, what this syringe exchange is. The ability to get people to get them Narcan so they can take it with them out on the street to reverse those near fatal overdoses that happen and are happening, unfortunately, with more frequency these days, with fentanyl being basically the thing on the street besides methamphetamines. And so we really need to make sure that we have access for people when it comes to harm reduction, needle exchanges. And at the same time, though, what we really need to do too is part of the reason for harm reduction, either through needle exchanges or safe injection sites, is really that opportunity to build trust with people who are actively using, who are suffering from a substance use disorder. So those people can make connections with somebody. So maybe it would be that day that they walk into that safe injection site or that needle exchange, or just have some outreach with the home team, Brooks and Courtney, who are friends of mine from Milestone that are out on the streets in Portland, and say, today's the day, can you help me? Unfortunately, people wanting to get that help, we don't have the beds to help them. We don't have the location to send them on that day to say, here, this is it. And what we need really is more medically assisted withdrawal beds, detox beds, to be available for individuals so that they have those. When it comes to decriminalization, that's something that I want to see what happens in Oregon. I think Oregon is going to provide us with a lot of information and see how that law that was passed by referendum does. But I do think that we need to take a new look or a fresh look at the threshold amounts that exist under 17A, chapter 45, when it comes to the amounts, because when you hear from people on the street, people who are in recovery as well, that they used 3, 4, 5, 6 grams of fentanyl a day. I mean, that is eye-opening. I'll just leave it as that. And so I think these conversations need to occur because unfortunately, we're losing way too many people. We need more options for them.
Thank you. Jackie, anything to add?
I'm just seeing the questions, by the way. I apologize to the people who've asked specific questions that are much more detailed. In some ways, I know we're trying to generalize. I really support making harm reduction a central focus. It's not really exactly a DA job. I do think that this is one of those areas, though, where leadership is essential. I also think that talking about what we charge, what we don't charge, what the circumstances are when we don't charge, it's a conversation that started to happen a little bit more this year with the new legislation. Unfortunately, however, we didn't get past some of the legislation that was proposed around reporting. The Good Samaritan law that did pass, I really strongly support. I was glad to see that pass. I do think that we need to have a conversation with the community about how harm reduction can work, what the community's role is. I don't see that as a DA-led conversation. Again, the policies within the office are where I see the DA playing the primary role, and there's a lot of work to be done there.
Great. Jonathan?
Yeah, and I'm not choosing to look at the questions right now because I just focus on what's being asked. It might be a little bit more difficult if your brain's going numerous places. But the Good Samaritan law, just to touch on that real fast. Yeah, just like Jackie, I supported that because the Good Samaritan law, it's not so much about who you can prosecute and who you can't. It's about getting the message out to people who are actively using that. If somebody's suffering an overdose, that they should and they'll be safe if they call medical providers to get help for that person. It's about saving lives, and that's the key thing that I think we can all agree on.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yes, and as Jackie acknowledged, a lot of the questions coming in are really, really great questions, but very specific. And so we are trying to generalize so we can hit as many topics as possible. But we so appreciate the questions, and we'll definitely share them with the candidates afterwards. Jim?
I'm going to ask one final question here from the audience, and we may have to go a little shorter on the responses. And this is kind of a critique of the way treatment courts are conducted. The question is this: are these treatment courts really the best possible way to address issues of substance abuse and/or mental illness? These treatment courts use the coercive nature of felonization and prison to get people to agree to treatment. Wouldn't it be better to envision diversion outside of the system, away from the coercive threat of incarceration, to encourage people to get the help they want or need, rather than force them and punish them if they don't comply? And I'll start with Jackie.
This is a great question. I'll bet I know who wrote it because the language is very familiar to me. However, it's a really important question. The reality is that prosecutors, our job is to take the criminal conduct that occurs, defined by the legislature, and go ahead and figure out what to do with it. I agree that the best way to deal with substance use is not through the criminal justice system. It just isn't. However, that's our role, is to take the work that we do and try to deliver justice within those limitations. So the idea that, diversion happens outside, great. I would be thrilled if diversion happened more often before. The best diversion is before there's criminal conduct. Having said that, I have specific ways to make sure that people end up either with misdemeanors from felonies or with dismissals through treatment. The coercive power is the power to make change, like it or not. Most of us have a moment in our lives where we realize that we can do something different. We realize that we can change in some way. Sometimes it's something really bad. Sometimes it's something really great, like when you fall in love with your fabulous spouse, if you're lucky enough to have that happen. I think that the worst day in your life can end up giving rise to the best opportunity for change. That's who I am as a prosecutor, and that's the sort of thing that I want to offer, not through the treatment courts, by the way. I think I've tried to make that clear. I think that everybody who has a touch of the criminal justice system, that is an opportunity to help. It's an opportunity to make change, because that makes us safer in the long run. And if nobody is aware of the fact that we still have one of the highest incarceration rates in the Western world, please be informed about that. Means incarceration rate, quite low nationally. Our national rate is ridiculous and unsupportable, and it needs to change. If I am elected, I will make sure we make some of those very common sense, practical changes to offer treatment.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah, no, I think that that's a very good point and a very good keen observation when it comes to the treatment courts. Yes, it's a court. It means that somebody is justice involved. And ideally, we would get people into recovery or into treatment and then hopefully into recovery outside of the criminal justice system. Because like I've been saying earlier, this is an imperfect system. This is not a system that is ideal. You don't want that anvil hanging over somebody's head. At the same time, though, it's tough to not recognize the people that I know who are in recovery who have told me that it was the criminal justice system that was actually that mechanism that actually got them into recovery. And ideally, that wouldn't be the situation, but it has been for many. So we try to use these treatment courts. We try to act with compassion. We understand that we're hoping that we're going to give that person the tools that they're going to be able to use for themselves when it comes to getting out after they're done with the court and back into our community, hopefully with a renewed sense of tools, but also a renewed sense of hope that they can do this. And I think that that's one of the things that actually has been one of the best, most successful things that I see is when somebody actually graduates. I think Jackie would agree with me that that's a good day because you really feel that hope for individuals when they get out. But I agree that it's not a perfect system. You don't want them. You don't want people to be justice involved. I always say to people, if I meet you in the court system, you're either a victim or defendant. Neither one is a good thing to be. So if we can try to work better with our community and really try to get more options for individuals, I think that we're going to be better off. But treatment court is for those high risk, high needs individuals, meaning high risk to fatal overdose and high needs because they've gone through many treatment programs that unfortunately haven't properly addressed their substance use disorder. So we're trying something new here. And that's what these treatment courts can help with.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm not going to give an extra minute of response because we've reached almost the end of our time together. Before we close, we'd like to offer you both the opportunity to share any parting thoughts briefly. And Jonathan, I'm going to start with you this time.
Well, again, I assume 2 minutes, right, Jim?
Or something like that.
Something like that. All right, just cut me off. No, I just want to say again, thank you to the Portland Center for Restorative Justice, to Jackie for being here, to USM, and also for the people who have been paying attention. I see some names that are familiar to me, and I'm glad that you're part of this because a lot of those names actually are people who are involved with Cumberland County and really have a stake in this. When I become district attorney, I acknowledge that I was very fortunate to get elected. 75% of the population or around that voted for either the Democrat or the Republican who had withdrawn from the race, meaning that those individuals actually voted for two people who were no longer willing to be the district attorney. And it goes to show you that the district attorney race is not paid attention to enough. We need more people paying attention. This is a very important role that I'm in now, and I want to be able to keep that. But when I hit the ground running in 2019, I said, I'm going to use this opportunity to make some practical, some progressive, and some smart changes to the criminal justice system. And I think looking at what I've done with mental health, looking what I've done with substance use disorder, looking what I've done with racial equity issues, looking what I'm trying to do with data collection, I all think that this demonstrates what my values are, and they are very reflective of democratic values. To the point that I've had numerous Democratic DAs tell me about what I'm doing in Cumberland County, stuff that they're trying to do in their counties. I think there's no higher compliment than I can get from them. So I would ask you to look at my record, speak to people who are who work in the criminal justice system. I'm very confident that you're going to see that what we've been doing in Cumberland County has been positive. And I think that what we can continue to do in the future is we're going to keep on that positive route. And that's what I want to do. And I'm hoping to get your support on June 14th for my reelection.
Thanks, Jonathan. Jackie, if you had a few minutes.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. The reason I ran is because when I was thinking about running, it was before Jonathan had registered to be a Democrat. I reached out to dozens of people in Cumberland County, and I heard many of the same issues that they felt were there in 2018. There was still no accountability, no clear prosecution policies, no vision about reducing incarceration and offering more treatment. The treatment courts only handle a few dozen people at a time. So they're not at all able to deal with the incredible numbers of people who are struggling with substance use addiction right now. These changes need to be accountable. They need to be public. We need to be able to deliver to the public the opportunity to have all of our experiences represented. This is a democratic nomination. This is the process to select our Democratic representative in the DA race. And it concerns me greatly that someone who could have spent so much time as a Republican did not notice the many justice issues that are deeply implicated in the Republican stance on everything from women, immigrants, our youth and their perspective on the economy, economic injustice. These issues have informed my entire life and all of my experience. And if I'm elected, I'll make sure that they are represented by the Cumberland County District Attorney and that we are able to lead and champion real, measurable, accountable change. Thank you. I want to thank everyone for hosting this as well, and Jonathan for doing this again.
Thank you both so much. This has really been wonderful. We're so pleased. Jonathan Sarbeck, Jackie Sartoris, thank you both for joining us. Thank you everyone who attended on Zoom, and please make sure to vote in the primary election on June 14th. One last final thank you to the Portland Center for Restorative Justice and the University of Southern Maine Department of Criminology. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Good night.